Now, my message. Last week I preached the first message of a two-part series, a two-part mid-series detour from our series, the current series that we're in. And we spent some time looking at our messy life. As I just mentioned, we are this week living it. Managing expectations and learning skills to help us persevere through the tough, messy reality of life is so important when talking about longevity and getting to the end of your life having stayed true to Jesus and his dream for the earth. Now, Jesus never pulled any punches when he said that in this life we would experience difficulties, trials, sorrow, tribulation, distress, suffering, affliction, troubles, and persecution, depending on the translation you're reading. And he was only describing what would happen to you in John 16, not what would happen because of you. So the promise that we have, and we're all about promises, is that life will be difficult and messy. If you're a control freak or a perfectionist, it's going to be even harder. Do we have any of those in the room this morning? Don't put your hand up, because we'll all look at you and feel sorry for you. The Bible tells us over and over again that life is tough, but it also gives us hope that we can navigate our way through every situation that we find ourselves in to live lives that are fulfilled and fruitful. Our ability, as we learnt last week, to manage our emotions and not allow the state of our feelings to lead us into harmful behaviours that damage our relationships or our future is vitally important. The great hope that we have is that has been reinforced during our series, Where's God?, has been that the list of things that can completely take us out is surprisingly small, and God's ability to help us through the mess we so often get ourselves into is enormous. Now, whilst here at Grace we want to equip you with practical tools to help you avoid disappointment or being blindsided because you didn't manage your expectations correctly in life, there's another side to the equation that we need to address, and to that end, today, the topic of my message is our amazing life. So last week it was our messy life. This week is our amazing life. Last week we focused on the failures of the various characters of the Old Testament, specifically those found in the first 5 books, and how their failures didn't disqualify them from leaving a legacy that still speaks to us thousands of years later. And I finished my message by asking the question, what was their redeeming quality? And my answer was, they took God at his word and continued to believe that he cared about them. And because of that, they remained under the influence of God's presence for their entire life and subsequently lived blessed lives. Now, just as an aside, to be blessed simply means you're living in close proximity to God. Blessing is a byproduct of walking with God and coming under his governance and covering. If you're walking with God, you are already blessed. It has nothing to do with how much money you've got in your bank account, where you were born, how you were raised, what current job you are in at this point in time. That's got nothing to do with the blessing of God. Oftentimes that's just got to do with luck or the fact that you were born in a particular area. The blessing of God is on every person's life who is walking with God. You got that? Yeah. So if you're walking with God, you are blessed. And don't let the world tell you anything differently. Don't let your emotions tell you anything differently. If you're walking with God, you are under his covering. Now that doesn't mean that bad things won't happen to you. That doesn't mean that you won't struggle. It means that you are walking in close proximity to God, and because you're in close proximity to God, the favour and the blessing of God is on your life. If you want to know what it's like without the favour and blessing of God, hang out with people who don't know him. And they can be really rich, they can have all the stuff, but you will find that it's almost like they're dead on the inside. When you walk with Jesus, you're alive. Now, the hope of the stories that we've been reading about through our series, that I said that we could take home with us last weekend, was that if you don't give up on Jesus, then your future well-being is set in stone. However, if we're not careful, we can adopt a bunker mentality and retreat from the world at times. because the world can appear to be cruel, heartless, and full of angst against anyone who tries to make a difference for the good of others. Now, there's an entire online business that I actually find quite amusing, called despair.com. Some of you have heard me mention this a couple of times. That's grown up around the disappointments of life. I shouldn't be laughing, it's terrible. Yeah. Around the disappointments of life. And one of their best-selling products are demotivational posters, which, as you can imagine, are the exact opposite to motivational posters. And even though it's mainly tongue-in-cheek, some of it strikes a little bit too close to home. And they've just recently released a new bunch of them. And they start off with this wonderful word, with words. So it'll believe, never give up, foresight, dream small. And then they've got the subtext underneath it. So this week, I thought, just to show you what the world can be like for some people, I thought I'd let you see a couple of, 4 of those demotivational posters. The first one, believe. Don't let anyone tell you that dreams can't come true. My life's turned into a long waking nightmare. Never give up. Never stop trying to exceed your limits. We need the entertainment. Foresight. I like this one. Those who say it can't be done shouldn't interrupt those of us busy proving them right. Oh, and this one. Dream small. It's your only hope for success. Really. Now, because I didn't want to leave that last one up on the screen for too long, I came up with my own for you this morning. Security. Though they stumble, they will never fall, for the Lord holds them by the hand. Psalm 39. Yeah. Now, every one of the characters that we've learned about this year saw God's plan for their family, community, and nation fulfilled through their lives in spite of their failures and setbacks. In spite of the things they did, and in spite of the things that others did to them. And this morning, I want to encourage you to not allow the failures of your own life or the difficulties that life throws at you to cause you to lose sight of the hope that God places in all of his children's hearts. When I started out in ministry, I had a dream to see an entire Australian community impacted for good by the church. I'd read some amazing stories when I was going through Bible college of incredible things that happened overseas. And even though they were inspiring, I always had in my heart the dream to see it happen here in Australia. As a youth pastor, I wanted to see the high school that I was running a lunchtime program in completely saved. Every single kid there saved and believing in Jesus. When we moved into pastoring our own church in Townsville, I started up a community magazine and I raised sponsorship right across our region from businesses to put on a youth worker in our local area 2 days a week, which funnily enough was a public housing estate, just like the one that we're in today. It was in Townsville that I started asking deeper questions about the mission of the church and what it meant to reach a community, because I realised that Jesus wanted to be present at the very heart of every Australian community, regardless of size or location, and not simply on the outskirts. But unfortunately, many of the churches that I knew at the time, and unfortunately even till today, were making very little impact on people outside of their own church community. The broader community, in most cases, didn't even know they existed. And all that potential for doing good and bringing the hope of God to our communities was being lost. See, in the past, our brand of church has been guilty of just pushing our message out to every person that we could, feeling that we were doing our job when we mentioned the name of Jesus multiple times in a conversation. And we justify it by saying that we were preaching the gospel, as though there was something magical about the words we used. However, we fail to realise that the same annoyance that we felt when Mormons or Jehovah's Witnesses turned up on our doorsteps was the same annoyance that we created in the hearts of people who were unlucky enough to experience our form of proclamation evangelism. Now, I'm making some very sweeping generalizations right now. And I'm making it to our church because I think you know where I'm coming from when I'm talking about. There is a place to speak. There is a place to talk about Jesus. But that's not the beginning of the evangelistic journey for 99% of the people in our communities today. Because they have been inoculated to Christianity. They have had Christianity pillarized from pillar to post in the media, and they don't have they're not receptive to Christianity. They're not receptive to our message. So we have to get really smart with the way we reach the community. We have to get really smart with the way we bring Jesus to our local community. And along the way, earn the right to explain to them the hope that we have, which Peter talks about. Be ready, in season and out of season, to give an explanation. Why would I have to give an explanation? Because someone is asking me something. To give an explanation of the hope that I have. Why would they ask me to give an explanation of the hope that I have? Because they've seen something in my life that they don't have in theirs. And over time they realise that they want what I have. That only happens through relationship. It only happens when people get to know you. Nobody tries to sell someone a car over the phone. You give them a test drive. In Australia, we've been telling our churches to go and sell cars to people who've never test drove those cars. It's very quiet in here. A little bit of controversy on a Sunday morning's not too bad. It's a bit cold outside. I'm trying to heat you up. When we moved back to Tassie and took on the leadership of Grace, I went through a period where I focused on church life and growing our attendance base. And during those earlier years, I took on the role as state president of our movement here in Tasmania. Grace had been in a slow decline over a number of years prior to us taking it on, at no fault of the previous leadership, might I add. It was just part of the natural ebb and flow of church life. And in the first 5 years, we saw our church grow from 200 to 600 members. But you know, even with a very church-centric focus, I still found the time to put together a document called the Grace Centre and write down in words for our elders and our board a dream that I had for a church centre that would be used by the community throughout the week. That document ended up being tossed in my bottom drawer and forgotten as we faced the challenges of a move across the river and then a reversal in the direction that we thought we were headed in at the time. And when I say forgotten, I mean completely forgotten. I completely forgot I'd even written it. It was only 2 years ago that I found it on my hard drive, this document called the Grace Centre. I thought, wow, is that amazing? I'm doing something that I talked about that I completely forgot about. It's you don't have to be bright to be a pastor. I'm telling you right now, you just got to follow Jesus, and he'll get you there somehow, some way. I'm living proof of it. Fast forward to November 2015 when we purchased the Rugby Tavern, and over the next 7 years turned it into an amazing community facility that serves our local area and demonstrates every day of the week out of the Grace Centre that there's a hope that's greater than their past. And now we're on the cusp of launching a multi-million-dollar project that will benefit the poor and disadvantaged in our communities for years to come through the provision of 6,000 to 8,000 meals, healthy meals cooked per week for Tasmanians doing it tough, and traineeships being offered to young people in our community who want to work in the hospitality industry. And what's crazy about all of that is that we are less than half the size of the church that we were when we were in the city, and yet we are doing far more good in our community than we have ever done in the past. Now, when I wrote that last sentence, as I was preparing my message, I had one of those rare moments with God in my office where I felt the Holy Spirit whisper in my ear. And he said this. He said, and I've written it down so I don't forget what he said. It was so clear. He said, "This is why you've gone through so much grief over the past 11 years. I needed you to know that it was me doing it, otherwise you'd run the risk of thinking you managed to bring it about through hard work and your own ability. If you're to encourage others to believe me for amazing outcomes in their lives, you have to share my message from a place of weakness, not strength. I'm just going to put that last sentence up on our tiny little screen here so you can see it. If you're to encourage others to believe me for amazing outcomes in their lives, you have to share my message from a place of weakness, not strength. And maybe if you've been part of this journey as a church with us over the last years, maybe you've been feeling a little bit disappointed and discouraged as our church has declined in numbers, as we've seen people that we thought would be with us forever, for whatever reason, taking off. I did. It was an ongoing grief that I carried. There was an ongoing, God, why? We were going so well. We crossed the river. We were following you. Then we started to drop in numbers. And then we finally end up here in Clarence Plains when we thought we were going to be down in Cambridge with a multi-million-dollar facility that would hold conferences and all this sort of stuff. But here we are in Ropey. God, why? What were you up to? And it was like everything that we had been doing just stopped working in one regard. And yet in the midst of all of that, God was doing something in our hearts and in this local community. And now we are seeing an absolute miracle. And God gets the glory. And even more importantly, you get to see at first hand that no matter how weak you are, no matter how little you think you can bring to the table, if you hold on to God, because I think that's what our church has done really well. In the midst of everything, we've held on to God. Said, God, we're just going to follow you through. God, you're leading us here. We don't understand. We're just going to keep going. We're going to keep turning up. We're going to keep smiling and look the devil in the eye and say, no, we're not going to stop. We're going to keep coming through. And we've managed to do that. If you will do that in your own life, regardless of whether it seems to be going backwards, you can accomplish something that will be truly amazing. Because I know maybe you kind of like you've gotten a little bit used to the Grace Centre over the last 6 years. We talk about it quite a bit and what God's been doing. But it is actually quite extraordinary. It's quite amazing. And this kitchen, when we launch it, I think it's going to open up incredible doors for us. We already have amazing credibility and influence in our community far above our weight. We're punching far above our weight. Well, we have a youth program that meets here on Friday nights. That has between 70 and 100 kids coming out to it every single week. And there isn't another youth program that I know of. And I've talked to not just church, in the church world, I think it's probably the largest outreach program that's being run in our state. But outside of the church world, when you talk to community, when you talk to people who work with youth services, they're saying the same thing. They get maybe 12 or 15 people together if they're lucky. And they celebrate that. They jump up and down and say, this is fantastic. And it is. It's great when kids gather. But we've got huge numbers of kids turning up here every Friday night. We've got a centre that we don't hold church in because we're demonstrating to our community that we love them with no strings attached, and our centre is our gift to them. And it's about to, in a few short months, launch a kitchen that will feed thousands and thousands of Tasmanians every week. And Jesus said, when I was hungry, you fed me. He's not going to say to you, when I was hungry, you didn't feed me. He's going to say to you, when you get to stand in front of him, when I was hungry, you fed me. That's going to be so good. If there's one thing that I keep praying to Jesus, I pray it all the time, Jesus, I want to help our church get to live lives so that when they stand in front of you, they hear you say, well done, good and faithful servant. And the things that'll get you get you to the place where you'll hear those words is if you do what Jesus said in Matthew 25. Why is it important that we share from a place of weakness and not strength? Because when people realise that God worked through your weakness, they are more likely to believe that he can do the same for them. That's why when we read Joseph's story or Abraham's story or David's story or Moses' story, we can be offended and encouraged all at the same time. We have a predisposition to look for perfection in the lives of others. We expect others to be perfect, and yet we live imperfect lives ourselves, and we know that. So we get ticked off at them when they fail and receive hope all at the same time. Now, how does that statement that's on the screen that you can hardly see from the Holy Spirit apply to you and your life, your family, your work, your lifelong ambition? We're seeing the dream of an entire community being blessed by the presence of Jesus in and through his church happen in our lifetime, here in Clarence Plains, not in some foreign country, but in our own backyard. And that's amazing. That's amazing. I believe that what we're doing now is preparing the ground for a harvest. I still passionately want to see young people, old people, male, female, everyone in between. I want to see them come to know Jesus the way we do. And we are doing exactly what needs to be done in our community at the moment to get them to a place where they can make that decision for themselves, because they will have seen Jesus through his church at work. They will have experienced unconditional love. They won't have experienced transactional love, which basically says, I'll do this for you because I want something from you. They'll have experienced the love of God with no strings attached, and they will have no excuse. Regardless of what the media might tell them, they'll have no excuse to say that they never saw what God was really like. That's our dream. That's what we want to show people. And you know what? The reason why we want to show them that is because they're incredibly valuable. They're not marks. They're not notches on our belt. Every single one of them was created in the image of God. They're potential brothers and sisters in our family. And we want to see them part of our family because they're worth it. They are worth it. And if we have to spend the next 20 years just to see one person come to Jesus, they are worth it. But I kind of think that we'll see a lot more. So what is it that you can believe for in your own life that's truly amazing? Now, obviously, you're already part of an audacious dream that's coming to pass, but is there something else that you'd love to see come to pass in your own life? What would make your life incredible if it were to happen? If money and resources were no option, if there were no hindrances in front of you, what would you love to see happen for Jesus during your lifetime? Now, I want to let you in on a wonderful secret, and this is the crux of my message this morning. And if you don't remember anything else, you need to remember this. This is why you are here today. You need to remember this. This is why I preached about your messy life last week. And if you didn't see that message, it's online. You can go and watch it. It's the messy parts of your life that will often give rise to the most miraculous of adventures and outcomes. When God is in the mix, your future is always full of hope. Now, as we've seen in our series so far, it was quite often the stuff-ups and the setbacks in our main characters' lives that ended up advancing God's plan, not just for them, but also for those whose lives they impacted. Abraham's family had to leave Ur because of Abraham's running with the local priests who believed in idols and not the one true God. He eventually ended up in the land that God promised to his future descendants and began a family dynasty that has lasted right through to our day, Israel. Isaac experienced persecution from his host country, but he set down roots, solidifying God's promise to his family line and having 2 sons in the process. Jacob, one of Isaac's sons, was forced to flee the family home because of an irreconcilable conflict with his twin brother. He then ended up working for his uncle and marrying his uncle's 2 daughters. He had 12 sons, and they became the 12 leaders of the tribes of Israel that are mentioned all throughout the Old Testament. Jacob had challenge after challenge after challenge. He's ripped off by his uncle. He ended up marrying a woman that he wasn't prepared to marry. He ended up with 2 wives. They constantly argued. They were at each other's throats for their entire life. His sons weren't the best. But somehow through it all, through the weakness of Jacob, through the stuff-ups, through the setbacks, God's plan came to pass. Joseph, one of Jacob's sons, was sold into slavery by his brothers. They're a good family, aren't they? But ended up saving his entire family from being wiped out by a famine because he was positioned by God through the injustices he suffered into a place of leadership in Egypt that enabled him to save his family from starvation. Moses was born in Egypt at a time when the Israelites were being oppressed and treated as slaves. He was adopted, miraculously adopted by Pharaoh's daughter, and he grew up in Pharaoh's household, gaining invaluable experience on how to navigate the Egyptian court and how to lead Pharaoh's army, but then had to flee for his life because he murdered an Egyptian. He spent the next 40 years looking after sheep in the wilderness, thinking that his dream of delivering the Israelites from captivity was over until he had an encounter with God that relaunched his destiny through those 2 experiences, previous experiences that he'd had. 40 years living in Pharaoh's palace and living as a shepherd in the very wilderness that he led the Israelites through. He gained experience he would need to lead the great exodus of the Israelites out of captivity and through the wilderness to the land that God had promised to their forefathers. In spite of their setbacks, and often because of them, they managed to accomplish amazing feats that are still impacting our world for good thousands of years later. So my question for you this morning is, what is it that stirs you up? What is it that stirs you up about the injustices of life that you are experiencing or that you see others suffering from? It could be that in your own personal struggle there's a seed of something amazing just waiting to bloom. Those questions that you're asking could be the very questions that need to be asked to bring about the change that God wants to happen in our world. I ask the questions: how do you bring Jesus into the centre of a community? And how do you know if you've successfully done that? Why did I ask those questions? Because I was frustrated and discouraged by the gap between rhetoric and reality that I felt was rife within the church back then. We talked a big game, but then didn't have any runs on the board when we stepped outside of our church buildings. Asking those questions and pursuing those answers came at a cost. The journey to where we are today as a church was convoluted. How do you say it, hon? Convoluted. It was convoluted and messy. It wasn't perfect, but it has led us to an amazing place. Now I have a number of slides here that one of them I prepared for Huey because I'm in them. I'm in one slide. Now, if it was on the big screen, you would have been able to see me. But Huey's got very good eyes. He's young. So I'll just... This is where it's led us to. Wait. Where's Wally? Oh, sorry. I'm in the way. So do you see me, Huey? I'm actually in the foyer, in the front area of this slide, but the previous slide I was standing on the disabled car parking thing. You didn't get to see it. If it was on the big slide, it was on the big screen, you would have seen it. But we've ended up in an amazing place. Don't for a moment think that you're washed up or pasture used by date. Don't for a moment think that you're not qualified, because let's be honest, none of us are. But let's see what your amazing life looks like in 10 years. Just remember to keep coming back to God and never lose sight of the truth that He cares for you, no matter how badly you stuff up or others hurt you. If you've been flattened by grief or taken out by disappointment, I want to tell you that you have an amazing life ahead if you keep God in the mix. In fact, out of the ashes of your current situation could come the greatest accomplishment for good and for God that your world has ever seen. That your family has ever seen. That your workplace has ever seen. That your community has ever seen. That your friends have ever seen. In the words of a very ordinary preacher, start where you are, use what you have, do what you can with God. And your future could very well be written about by people in the years that lie ahead. If I could have the news back, that'd be great. Let's pray.